the Second Amendment Liberal Podcast.
Welcome one and all to episode 1 of the Second Amendment Liberal Podcast. I'm your host, Brad. Today we're going to be discussing the purpose and ultimate goal of this podcast, what the hell a Second Amendment liberal actually is, and my personal politics and history with the Second Amendment. You'll be getting to know me a little better to understand why I've undertaken this project, and if you share my views, you'll know you're not alone. For those of you who don't know, this podcast is a spin-off of a small, yet rapidly growing subreddit of the name 2A Liberals. I never sought out to be a creator or moderator of a subreddit, but the folks over at a sub that shall remain nameless forced my hand. I had been a long-time contributor in this nameless sub, with upvoted and even gilded posts. People knew I was the resident quote-unquote black dude around there. The mods have always been a bit further to the left than what most of their subscriber base has felt comfortable with. Their posts were, and still are often, heavily downvoted. One day I posted a link to a Steven Crowder video, someone of whom I'm generally not a fan, but in this instance, the content of the video was politically neutral, respectful, and educational in regards to gun rights. The post was taken down. And when I asked the mod why, they told me it was because it originated from a right-wing source. That struck me as odd, because how many pro-gun, left-leaning sources are actually out there? Not many. About a week or so later, I criticized Democrats and their constant attacks on our Second Amendment rights. Apparently the mods at this nameless subreddit are under the impression that in order to be a liberal, you must be a Democrat as well, because they banned me, arbitrarily and out of nowhere. This experience led me to create the 2A Liberals subreddit, a place where people who are on the left have a place to discuss the state of our gun rights without being subject to dictatorial and authoritarian whims of mods. Fast forward months after that, and this nameless sub released a so-called mission statement, essentially detailing their requirements for participation. It was nothing more than a list of required beliefs that one must share in order to be considered a real liberal in their eyes. They always claimed the sub was under constant attacks by the right-wing, libertarians, and Trump supporters. They've never actually managed to present evidence of this infiltration, but they often use accusations of such against individuals to justify banning those who even slightly disagree with their extremist views. The release of this mission statement caused many to jump ship and migrate over to 2A Liberals. I made it known with a statement of my own that our community will tolerate opposing viewpoints, posts won't be censored, and disagreements won't lead to bans. It was well received, and the subreddit has been growing ever since. Now that I've discussed the origins of the subreddit, I will move on to the goal and purpose of this podcast. I wanted to get the message out there that you don't need to be a liberal and oppose gun rights. You don't have to let people bully you into voting for Democrats, or Republicans for that matter. I want like-minded people to band together and let our voices be heard. This podcast could potentially serve as a vehicle to do just that. We have to let the left know we won't put up with their abuse of our rights, and the right must be made aware they don't own the Second Amendment. With that said, what the hell is a Second Amendment liberal anyways? I'm sure the definition of a Second Amendment liberal changes from person to person, but as far as I define it, it's a left-leaning person that values their constitutional rights as a whole and sees the Second Amendment as a valuable and inseparable component. Contrary to popular opinion, the idea behind the Second Amendment is not conservative. It's extremely liberal in nature. The concept of it being a fundamental right, a part of your birthright as a human being, to arm yourself to protect your community from external and internal threats. At the time it was adopted, it was absolutely forward-thinking and progressive. The conservative position of the time was to not entrust arming the common folk out of fear of uprising against the upper classes. Anyone who insists gun rights is a conservative issue is not versed in its history. Quite frankly, I don't think you can truly call yourself a liberal unless you believe in the individual right to bear arms. While the purpose of the Second Amendment is to protect against tyrannical government, self-defense is a happy accident as a result of having such a right. The ability to possess the tools necessary to effectively protect yourself and your family without permission from the government is a matter of human rights and human dignity. How could any liberal be against that? The only people I see who speak out against this are those who've been misled by the anti-gun lobby's relentless campaign and non-stop barrage of disinformation and emotional manipulation, leading people to believe firearms are magical totems possessed by the souls of demons, which over time telepathically corrupt your mind and compel you to commit violent atrocities. If you truly are liberal, you are in favor of individual liberties, and gun rights is a major aspect of that. A lot of people insist I'm a libertarian based on my views of individualism, but it couldn't be further from the truth. I believe in regulated capitalism and universal health care, among other staple core modern liberal beliefs. I don't, however, endorse the way leftists have been behaving as of late. There's an attempt to push liberals into this tent of extremism brought about by SJWs and other far-left groups that believe in some wacky, nonsensical things. It's up to us, sane people on the left, to call out these crazies so they, along with the extremists on the right, can stop holding this country hostage with their shenanigans. Growing up, I wasn't a pro-gun rights guy. I never really even gave it much thought until I became an adult. My parents weren't anti-gun. They just never really brought it up. My mother had used a firearm in self-defense and in the defense of my sister and myself when we were quite young, but she tends to shy away from talking about it with people outside the family. She's rather embarrassed by the incident, but I couldn't be more proud. My father never really showed any interest one way or the other regarding firearms, so I arrived to my current state of mind through the study of civics and world history without major influence from my upbringing. I used to be a die-hard Democrat. I not only voted for Obama, I campaigned for him during his first presidential election, right before he became known and popular. If someone had a D next to their name, chances are I would have supported and voted for them unquestioningly. As my disappointment with his first and second terms started to set in, and I noticed the behavior of Democrats becoming more and more authoritarian in the aftermath of Sandy Hook, it just put a bad taste in my mouth. I became partyless. The more I searched around for a party, the more disappointed I became. There's no way I could ever be a Republican. I investigated libertarianism and found a lot of their economic beliefs to be lacking or troubling. In their obsession over government abuses of power, they completely and utterly failed to address the very real historic abuses of corporate power. I was not willing to trade one form of a master for another. I do, however, find their ideas on individual freedoms to be rather superb. I was so focused on not calling myself a liberal and getting as far away from the Democrat Party as possible, I even called myself a libertarian for a while, despite not feeling completely comfortable doing so. I then discovered classical liberalism, the concept of maximizing personal freedoms to the highest degree possible, while still having a functional government that's not powerful enough to needlessly interfere in people's lives is something that I want to bring to fruition. Today I do call myself a classical liberal, but I remain partyless. Perhaps I should just resurrect the Bull Moose Party and call it a day. How many of you out there feel the same? And now, a word from our sponsors. This is your host, Brad. Unfortunately, we don't have any advertisers at the moment. Thankfully, Patreon has us covered. As most people are aware, social media entities across the internet are clamping down on the ability for gun-related content producers to fund their projects. Your support on Patreon gives those of us here at the Second Amendment Liberal Podcast the ability to keep the lights on. As this project grows, expect interviews with interesting and notable people in the gun world, reviews of cool gun-related products, and travel to locations around the country to get the scoop on stories that otherwise would be out of reach. I have big things planned for the future of this podcast, folks. For $3 a month, you can pledge your support on Patreon. As things develop and take off around here, there will be all sorts of tiers and perks. If you find yourself unable to support us monetarily, hey, that's cool. I understand. I know money is tight for many people right now, and I just appreciate you listening. Go to patreon.com/2A Liberal Podcast. The number 2, the letter A, Liberal Podcast, and become a patron today. Thank you very much for listening. That's the show for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, you can head on over to the subreddit, 2A Liberals, or you can head on over to our Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Patreon at /2A Liberal Podcast. Number 2, letter A, Liberal Podcast. Thanks, everybody. Until next time.